Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Cunningham. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Alumni Relations at Lehigh University, and we have another great Mountain Talk for you today. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to do a little bit of choreography. We are recording this, so if you have to drop off early for any reason, or you know a friend who would benefit from seeing this, you'll get a link shortly after the presentation. In order to ask your questions or to have conversations in the back channel, we're using the chat. We do have 57 people on the call, and as you can imagine, if we allowed audio questions, it would get a little bit unwieldy, so we stick to the chat. That seems to work well. So go ahead and ask your questions in the chat, and I will read them aloud to our speakers. And if there's something that, if you ask a question, we don't get to it, we can send your questions to the speakers and they can answer later. All right, so today we have Professor Joshua Ehrig. He is also a Lehigh alum 3 times over, class of 02, 03, and 08. He's a professor in our College of Business. And we have Jamie Flinchbaugh, who is class of 94 and also a parent of a freshman. They are going to talk to us today about strategic planning, and it's a teaser in a way of a class that they teach through the Vistex Institute, which is our executive education program. And we'll put some links in the chat for you about that program as well. All right, Jamie.
All right, Josh is going to lead off, so take it away, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Jamie and I are really just ecstatic to be here. And today we're going to talk about the business model canvas, in particular, how Jamie and I utilize this not only with students on both the undergrad and grad level, but also with folks in the Executive Ed Vistex Institute, as well as corporate consulting clients. So really everyone, Jamie, from those new ventures to Fortune 500 companies, right? And everything in between. So really what we look at here is a visual representation of your organization, right? Because a lot of us kind of get pigeonholed into 1 or 2 components of it, right? Maybe we're in the marketing function, we're in the supply chain function, and we kind of look at it more from a tactical aspect within those particular functions. What the canvas does is it allows us to kind of see the dynamic and kind of interconnectedness of these components and how they work within an organization. Because really at the end of the day, they are all interconnected. So if we start here with the value proposition, we're really looking at what are kind of the quantitative or qualitative features, needs, benefits that you're providing to that customer. Okay, so really, if you think about Simon Sinek, right, you think about the why, the how, and the what, right? It's right. What is the why, the how, and the what of what you're trying to provide to that customer, right? And you can have different value propositions associated with different customer segments there on the right side. And Jamie, a lot of what we see is really a misalignment between the value propositions and those customer segments, right? So that interconnectedness is really, really important. And then of course, how does the organization actually have a relationship between the value proposition and that customer segment? So it could be transactional, it could be relational, or it could be contractual, right? But essentially, what are those touch points that you're going to have with those customers? Now, the value proposition, you could have different customer segments that have different value propositions and different touch points associated with that. So this model is meant to be dynamic in that respect, and it is dynamically changing all the time. So it's not a static model, right? Most importantly, how are you going to reach those? How are you going to reach those customers with your value proposition? And that's essentially your channels right there. Right. So what are some of the inbound and outbound strategies that you utilize to connect with each customer segment? Okay. And when we talk about customer segments, they could be from a new venture perspective, your early adopters, niche market, a mass market, or even a segmented market. Right. So, and you could have a customer and an end user. So Jamie, we always look at customers as being the ones that are what? That are essentially paying your bills, right? Essentially generating the revenue for you. So in this case, when we look at the revenue stream, we're thinking about what is the average selling price times the quantity, right? So what are the different revenue models associated with your organization? So it could be everything from a fixed price to a dynamic price, and it could be segmentation dependent, right? So, and if you really enjoyed this right side of the canvas here, this is really about customer development. Okay, so we see a lot of folks that gravitate towards the customer side, but don't necessarily gravitate towards the product side. And the product development side is really this left side of the canvas here. So we start with the key activities, and what are those key activities that support your value proposition? Okay, we write key because there could be many, many activities. It could be production, right? Supply chain, design, development, right? It could be research and development, right? It could be various different activities, but what are the key ones that effectively support your value proposition? And then from there, what are the key resources, right, that our value proposition requires? So in this case, it could be physical, it could be financial, it could be human, right? It could be IP related, right? Patents, trademarks, et cetera. And once you start kind of understanding those key resources and key activities, you start understanding the core competencies, those unique kind of strengths and attributes related to your organization. And then, of course, if we're missing certain key resources that do not support key activities, right, how do we effectively align those from a key partnership perspective, right? And key partners could be from a buyer-supplier perspective. It could be co-opetition when you're actually partnering with competitors, or it could be joint ventures, right, to name a few. And then, of course, we have our cost structure, which is effectively what are those most important costs associated with your organization, right? So, and I kind of always view the cost structure as what are some of the acquisition costs, right? And how does that align with your lifetime value on the revenue stream, right? And having that connect, a lot of organizations don't have that. So, all right, so Jamie, we've kind of given a great kind of overview here of the canvas. I think it'd be great for us to kind of go to, you know, how organizations can be resilient, especially in a COVID environment, and persevere or pivot with their business model. And then, of course, when we get to the Q&A, Jamie, we'll be able to address this with some real life examples based off some of the questions that Jennifer provides us.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Josh. And we'll looking forward to some questions here in just a couple minutes. So as we think about this, it's not about building the canvas, it's about how you use it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you use it. I think for some, it's an opportunity to collaborate, where different people have different ways of processing information, different ways of thinking. You come together on a common canvas, you work together on that common canvas as a way to collaborate. It's a way to see blind spots. If you might be very market oriented, and you don't see the stuff over here, you're not as good at that, or the other way around, and it helps expose some of your blind spots that you have. And fundamentally, it allows you to really manage and think through any pivots you have and the consequences of those pivots. So just to talk about different types of pivots, some are very incremental. They're really just about expanding what you do. And in most cases, it's about expanding your value proposition. You start to add new products or solve new problems through what you're doing. I'm already solving one problem, but while we're at it, we can solve another. And so we start to expand our value proposition. We might expand our channels. And we might be in one channel reaching different customers, and we seek to add to another. And start to find new channels to reach customers in new ways, or we might find new customers. We're working with certain customers so far, and we find new customers that resonate with our value proposition. Those are the most common ways in which you simply expand your business model in incremental ways, either with new value, new channels, or new customers. So that's one way to think about pivoting. Bigger pivots are where you really start to think about taking some aspect, right? So pivots, the definition of a pivot is I'm going one direction and I pivot around a key fulcrum point to go in a different direction. And so one main way to do is to pivot and build. And this usually is about taking something, in most cases, taking something back here and turning it into new value propositions. So using as a key example, Amazon retail. Amazon retail sells stuff to customers. They've done quite well over the pandemic, but their web servers became a key resource, and how to manage that became a key activity. They put this together and basically understood that they did this really well, and they generated a whole new value proposition with AWS, Amazon Web Services, a whole new business model, taking an asset and taking an activity that they did well internally and turn it into a whole new business model. Amazon's particularly good at that. In other cases, it's sort of abandon and pivot. And so if you look at Fujifilm and compare them to Kodak, right? This was all about film for both of those organizations. Well, Fujifilm, Kodak looked to make film cheaper, and that didn't go so well. Fujifilm figured out their IP portfolio, down here that fed film, and they developed a whole new chemicals business that was based on their IP portfolio and their ability to process chemicals. And so they built by abandoning film, they built an entirely new business model, leveraging what they were already good at. So those are three ways in which you might pivot, whether incrementally expanding, whether pivoting and building new things, or whether you abandon and pivot. Those are ways in which you use the business model canvas to think about your business in very, very different ways. So it's kind of a very quick summary of what we hope to cover in our longer workshop. But Jennifer, I think time maybe for some questions.
Bet. So James is wondering, I think we just went through some real life examples, but do you have any that, of this filled out, like the answers to the test that you can share maybe afterwards, or anything you have on your Miro right here that you could show?
Yeah, I used to sometimes share my own just as an example.
Yeah.
But, we do have it's not a well-developed one, but it's spring, so it's time for Rita's. If any of you live in the area, you might know Rita's. So here's a little bit about what that might look like.
Wait, Rita's is a Italian ice.
Yep.
In case
Italian
someone doesn't know.
right?
Oh, there you go.
That's their value proposition. Cold treats featuring Italian ice and custard. You look at their customer segments, it's families, it's sport teams, it's couples going out for date night, whatever that is. I'm not, different customer relationships. They have routine relationships. They also have sort of spontaneous. Their channels. A lot of it is really just their storefronts. Probably could be an added one here. They do billboard marketing. Not a lot of other marketing, at least that I've seen, and some of their key activities, their key resources of what they do. Real estate, fundamental, right? Big to what they do. Their equipment, their recipes, their standard work. All right, they have to be really good at bringing in largely high school kids to process their work very quickly and do it well consistently. So you go to one Rita's, you get the same thing you do at another Rita's. So this is a light touch, but just an experience that many people, resonates with many people, and a look into what it could look like, at least at a high level.
Yeah, and I would also add that a lot of folks, what they do with the value propositions, it's what they think it is, right? But it's got to be what the customer actually believes it to be, right? So you really have to take a customer-centric approach, especially with the value proposition and how it aligns with that customer segment.
Yeah. So as a just to build on that point, if you think about what's the value proposition, to kids it might be. It might be that, but I'm trying to duplicate here too fast. But to parents, it might be, occupy the kids and keep them going. That's their value proposition.
Exactly.
And so, in many ways, the value proposition answers what job does the product or service do for the customers. And again, when you particularly distinguish customers who pays and users who uses or consumes the product, they're not always the same value proposition.
So to follow on this example, let's say that Rita's was considering adding fried chicken to their menu. You would take them through this process of, okay, what's the value proposition of fried chicken or handbags or whatever, if they were thinking they would expand and, well, we get all these people coming to Rita's every night, why don't we sell them something else? So they would take this and kind of compare the new pivot to their existing things and figure out, well, we've got to add this customer segment, we've got to do this more. Is that how it works?
Absolutely. We'd start to look at, I'm just showing you different colors to distinguish, what are some things that, you might say, here's the green is what currently exists. And you might say the blue is what you're going to leverage, and the white might be brand new things. Right? And you start to go, if there's, a bunch of blue on here, which are things that you're leveraging already to work with your customers and deliver that, that's okay, because you're taking what already happens and changing incrementally. But if white is brand new things, and there's a whole lot of brand new things that you've got to figure out, now you've got a lot of learning to do. You've got a lot of investment, and you've added a lot of risk. And so you might say, oh, I've got one customer segment, and I'm going to leverage that customer segment, but everything else about our business model is new. There's a lot of risk in that. And how do we figure our way through that?
And now instead of executing on a business model, you're actually searching, right? And now you've got to do customer discovery and validation to even understand whether there is an actual potential product market fit there.
Right. So I'm going to go to Ray's question, and then Chris, I'll get back to yours because Ray's follows on here. So thinking about disruptions, pandemic, digital transformation, when thinking about the canvas, are those pivots, or are there things that could be temporary? I mean, restaurants are such a great example. Are they pivots, or are they something totally new?
Those are, I think something totally new is when this whole thing starts to break, right? So when there's we like to say that everything on here is an assumption, right? So you fill this up with assumptions. And some of those assumptions you can kind of stick with and rely on. Some of those assumptions you have to hold lightly and continually test. But when all of them cease to be true, right, then you have to say, well, what am I actually building on? Is the only thing I have a bank account and a legal entity, and that's the only thing left. But in a lot of pivots, sometimes they are short-term, sometimes they're short-term seasonal. The landscaper who uses their trucks to hang Christmas lights in November and December is a seasonal pivot that expands expands on key resources, in this case, trucks and labor. Pandemic, for some people, it's been temporary pivots. For others, it's been permanent pivots. And, for example, when I do show my own, a key resource for me was travel. I traveled for 3 to 4 weeks a month for 20 years, and I ceased to travel in the second week of March 2020. I've learned enough about all of the rest of this that this is no longer a key resource post-pandemic. And so my business model has permanently changed based on what's been learned. And so you have to be clear, about what you can delay, what you can adjust temporarily, and what you must adjust permanently, or what you can adjust permanently. Sorry, Josh, one more thing. I can't remember this name. There's an ancient Japanese art, which is basically when pottery breaks, you don't just fix it, you actually turn it into new art with gold inlay and enamel, and it's about taking something broken and making it more beautiful than it was before. And I think the best businesses did that throughout the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to Jamie's kind of example here, he understood what his core competencies were that he could transfer given the kind of disruptions occurring across the different business model components, or what he had to acquire, right, to make this new business model actually work. So, I think it's really important to kind of go to the core root there, especially as you're kind of dynamically changing this canvas.
Including this Miro board. This would be something we would have
Yeah.
done on a whiteboard,
Right.
15 months ago, and now we do it on Miro.
Right.
Yeah.
So Chris's question, he says, these tools are phenomenal for building alignment and exposing risks, especially with varied stakeholders. He uses them himself. Question, do you more commonly find yourself building these for stakeholder consumption or co-creating them with their stakeholders?
Yeah, so I would say see all the above, quite frankly. So in this case, I know with my MBA students, for example, this is what they do day one, and they do this to their organization, right? And so they're kind of doing it not only on their organization, but with fellow members in their organization as well. But I actually think it's super helpful to do this with various different stakeholders involved, right? Especially in the internal environment. So, because, as you brought up Amazon before, they tend to be customer centric, right? Like their discovery is really, they're doing infinite feedback loops with their discovery efforts and continuously changing this over time. So I think it's actually extremely helpful to do both at the end of the day, both internally, because you're not only, if you're not on the same page with this internally, right, how can you execute externally?
Right.
And, we see that all too often where, Jamie, you say to a client, describe what you do, what your value proposition is in one sentence, right? And you get 20 different answers.
Right.
So, and that kind of affects, the culture, right, of the organization as well, because the why the why of what you're doing is not only important externally to the customer, but internally to the company's culture as well. So
I would add it's a tool for collaboration and socialization. I do think it's always best when built collaboratively, but sometimes, somebody just has a vision. And so they document on a template like this, that vision, and then, but they hold it loosely. It's a set of assumptions. Here's the beginnings of my idea. And you get you go have conversations and you show people, even back when I was doing more active angel investing, when I would get a pitch from an entrepreneur, I would very quickly, and I wouldn't use much of a template, I'd very quickly draw the template on on a piece of paper, and I'd start taking notes on a template. And then I'd realize, well, you didn't talk at all about this stuff. And that's where I started asking questions. So I think it can be both, but even when I get a new entrepreneur, I first ask, do you have a business model canvas?
Right.
And let's start talking about it at that level. I don't want them to go build it with me. I want them to show me their vision.
Right. Okay. So Eric's question, nice presentation. Using your model, how would you overcome not invented here syndrome, which can be found in most organizations?
Two things I think are really useful. One front end, one back end. These are my two favorite. One is you put yourself in a position of asking yourself, what would I do if? And so, or what would somebody else do if they were me? So, a favorite one is, what if Amazon and Chick-fil-A ran vaccination distribution? What would it look like? Right? What if Chick-fil-A entered my business? What if Amazon entered my business? What if, Wawa entered my business? What would they do differently? You start getting out of your own head and you start examining a different lens on it. And so that helps expand your creativity. On the back end, it's all about testing. It's don't lock into assumptions. Go test them, test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. Run lots of experiments.
Yeah.
I like to say my own pivot from March of last year is a product of not one big experiment, but 1,001 smaller ones.
Yeah, so it's really a mindset. I mean, it's more of an agile mindset as compared to a waterfall mindset. And Jamie and I, this is really validated learning, right? Because if I'm an existing organization, I have product market fit, I'm probably in the execution phase. But when you have to do one of those big pivots and go back to the search stage, right, where you're pre-product market fit, and you have to do discovery, a lot of folks will just gloss over all of that and assume that they have, that their assumptions are already correct. They spend a ton of time and resources staying on that execution stage and ultimately fail when they bring that new product, or innovation or process to market.
Yeah, and just to put a punctuation mark on that is, if you have a broken culture, a culture that doesn't embody learning, that doesn't value experimentation or even values the market, a template will not change that. It might be an opportunity to push people in that, but the tool doesn't solve a cultural problem. If you have the wrong culture, it's going to be hard to overcome that just by filling out a business model canvas.
Yeah, that's a whole class in and of itself, right? Corporate culture.
Right. Well, we still have a few minutes, right? So.
Caroline's question, I like this one. If you have a new business or startup concept, what is the sequence of filling this out? There's probably not 100% right answer, but what would you recommend for her?
I mean, my bias answer here, Jamie, would simply be, if you don't have a value proposition in a customer segment, none of this really matters. If you're not providing a benefit need feature to a specific customer, especially in the early stages, right? Because you have very limited time, very limited resources, right? A lot of people, especially at the startup level, are going to try to execute on the entire vision, but they don't execute on the kernel, that where do you start kind of point there. And at that point, if you don't have a specific value proposition with a specific early adopter, and you have that lack of focus, you're going to be in trouble, right? So you're going to be kind of in that haze of the vision, and you're never actually going to fully execute. So I always tell students, if you're trying to validate whether your customer wants to go from A to B, don't build me the car, start with the skateboard.
Got it. Okay. Ehrig asks, would you use the same process to better understand your competition and build strategies to better position your business against the competitive forces?
I think that's, so for one, I think the best entrepreneurs, and this is part of how I think strategy has started to change over the years, is focus more on your customers and what their problems are and what their needs are and their markets are, rather than find the market and figure out where you can fit. So I think the best strategists pay more attention to customers than they do their competition, and I think this tool helps you do that. That being said, especially depending on your role, if you are especially in a very competitive market and want to outflank your competition, I think it is a useful exercise to go through. Just be aware of what you can see and what you can't see, because there's a lot that there's a lot that's behind the curtain. Right? We like to call this sort of front stage and backstage. There's a lot behind the curtain that you can't see, and you have to be careful about what you can't see.
Yeah, and I think those blind spots are not only external, but internal to the organization as well, right? So, and this kind of allows you to kind of see it through the kind of more of a visual lens in a strategic way. A lot of folks that come into this always kind of look at it from a tactical, within their own function perspective, and don't necessarily have an idea about how it all plays out with the different functions. So it allows them to think more strategically and become better strategic leaders.
I have to say, Ehrig writes, I disagree. It's not just an exercise, it's a way to understand the competition, use the model inside and outside. So, hey, if people are using it and it's helpful, that's great, right?
Yeah.
It's the tool.
It's just a tool. It's how you use it that matters. So,
right. Let's see, we are at 1 o'clock. We have one more question that we didn't get to. So do you have 2 more minutes to stick around and we can answer this one last question? John is asking, how can the model be applied to rethinking the metropolitan office space from supply and demand perspective? We've actually had a lot of webinars with the Goodman Center for Real Estate that have addressed that, the real estate challenge. So have you intersected with them at all on that front?
Not directly. I've certainly talked with many of my clients about about rethinking the future of work. but if you have office space as a key resource, if it is your business, it's your value proposition, right? So I think that's part of it. So you do have to look at from a commercial standpoint, what, if I'm offering this as the value proposition, what new value propositions are out there? Because what companies look at office space for has changed, and you have to be not just aware of that as a changing assumption, but actually help shape it fundamentally. If it's simply a resource, well, then you have to ask yourself, is it a key resource, or was it one that we just thought was a key resource? And that's what a lot of companies are examining today. Was our office space actually key or not? Or was it simply convenient and that's just how we always worked? And there's many different answers. I do think that I look at value proposition of office space, and I think about connection, I think about collaboration, I think about culture as three main values that the office space provides, but that's only for companies that are deliberate about all three of those things.
Yeah. And from a disruption perspective, the canvas allows you to kind of determine, if you don't want to make fundamental pivots, right, but you want to make kind of quasi moonshot bets, so to speak, right? How can you effectively do them in ways where you can leverage a lot of the resources that you have available to you and be proactive in it as an organization, right? I mean, the organization's main responsibility is to be relevant, right? And I think we're all wrestling with that, in this COVID environment.
Got it. All right. So just one more plug for people who are on this call and found this as intriguing as I did. There is more to be had. The full course on creating the business model canvas is May 17th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's one of many amazing classes that Vistex is offering in the executive learning and research education space. So I really urge you to take a look at that. I hope today was useful. Thank you so much, Jamie and Professor Ehrig. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.